Good morning, class. Today we will start with absorption and transport of water, and we will see how water is transported in the plant from the root to the stem to the leaves. That is unidirectional flow of water. This topic, absorption and transport of water by root. Now, if you remember, we had studied under anatomy of flowering plants the structure, internal structure of the root. I had told you about the TS of the root. Now, let us consider the epidermis of the cell. This is the root hair. This is the epidermal cell. Inside the epidermis, there are several layers of cortex, cortical cells, and the innermost layer of the cortex is endodermis. This is endodermis. We had studied that endodermis has Casparian strips. Endodermis has Casparian strips or Casparian bands, and these Casparian bands are made up of a waxy layer called suberin. This is cortex, this is epidermis, and this is the root hair. Then inside the epidermis there is pericycle, and then there is xylem. Let us say this is a continuous channel formed by xylem. This xylem is in continuation with the xylem of the stem, and then this xylem continues in the leaf. It is the petiole, and then we have the leaf, xylem of the leaf. Then the leaf has, if you talk of a dicot leaf, it has an upper epidermis covered by cuticle. Then we have the mesophyll tissue. Mesophyll tissue is made up of palisade parenchyma and spongy parenchyma cells. And then we have the lower epidermis with lot of openings, stomatal openings. This is suppose this is the internal structure of the leaf. This is upper epidermis, this is lower epidermis, covered by a waxy cuticle layer. This is stoma, transpiration, water loss will take place through this. This is palisade parenchyma, this is spongy parenchyma. Together we call it mesophyll tissue. So this is the channel internally. Earlier I had drawn the diagram just to show you how water is carried. Movement of water is unidirectional from the root to the stem to the branch to the leaf. This is the internal structure. Now we are going to study about absorption and transport of water. So we see that water moves from the soil into the epidermis. From the epidermis it moves to the cortex. From the cortex, the innermost layer of the cortex, the endodermis. Then through the pericycle it moves to the xylem tissue. And from the xylem of the root, it moves to the xylem of the stem. Then from the stem, as I told you, suppose this is the leaf. So this midrib, petiole, which continues into as the midrib of the leaf through to the petiole, and petiole basically is made up of vascular tissue, and then this water is lost through the openings present in the upper and the lower epidermis. If it is a dicot leaf, then the stomata are more on the lower surface, so water is lost through these openings. Now basically there are three ways in which water can be transported. One way is called the apoplast pathway. The other way of transportation of water is called the symplast pathway. And the third phenomena or process is called vacuolar pathway. This is the general direction of movement of water that I have told you, shown you as internal structure, and earlier I had drawn the diagram to tell you that how water moves from the root to the stem to the branches and to the leaves. Unidirectional movement of water and then out through the stomata of the leaves, and this is the internal structure. Now I will explain this movement by these three pathways which the water takes place. For this I need to draw the cells. The structure of the cell in detail. Suppose this is the epidermal cell. You know a cell has a cell wall. Cell has cytoplasm and a vacuole. The next cell, suppose this is the cell of the cortex. It also has a vacuole. Then the next cell is the cell of the endodermis, the cell wall of the endodermis, the vacuole, and then we have the xylem. So this is epidermis, epidermal cell. This is cell of the cortex. This is endodermis, and then we have xylem. Basically this is the order of cells. This is the xylem. Now this is the cell wall. In the endodermis there are Casparian bands made up of suberin, which is waterproof. Let us say this is the Casparian band. This is waterproof. Now the cell walls of the plants have cytoplasmic strands as connections between the cells. That is called plasmodesmata. Plasmodesmata connects the various cells. This is the cytoplasm, this is the vacuole. Apoplast, symplast and vacuole. Apoplast is movement of water through the cell walls. Water is absorbed by osmosis, comes to the through the cell wall and through the cell membrane, comes into the cytoplasm. Then the membrane covering the vacuole is called the tonoplast. It is also semi-permeable in nature like the cell membrane. Cell wall is fully permeable. So water enters through the cell wall and through the cell walls without entering the cell. It moves from here. It enters the cell wall and through the cell wall it moves to the cell wall of the cortex till finally it reaches the endodermis. Endodermis has Casparian bands and these are waterproof. That means they are going to prevent the entry of water. So water will not be able to go through the cell wall. When it moves through the cell wall, the pathway of water is called apoplast pathway. And when it moves through the cytoplasm, through the plasmodesmata, it is called the symplast pathway. Symplast pathway is through the cytoplasm of the cell, and which is through cytoplasmic strands which are called plasmodesmata. So that is symplast pathway. Now in endodermis, movement of water till the cortex is through the cell walls and part of it is through symplast and even through the vacuoles. So Vacuole, as I told you, has an outer membrane called tonoplast, which is semi-permeable in nature. But the endodermis is going to act as a barrier. So here, instead of moving through the cell wall, water from the cell wall moves into the cytoplasm, and then finally reaches the xylem. This is xylem, and xylem of the root is in direct connection with the xylem of the stem. This is layer of soil, this is root, this is stem, so it is in direct connection. So this pathway from soil, water moves to epidermis, to cortex, to endodermis, to xylem of root, to xylem of stem. The xylem of stem is connected, moves into the branch or directly to the leaf through the petiole. Petiole is the stalk of the leaf, which continues into the leaf as a midrib, and finally is distributed in the cells of the leaf and is given out through the stomatal openings in the leaf. So this is the direction of movement or transport of water in the plant. And the various pathways which water takes place is the apoplast pathway through the cell wall, the symplast pathway which is through the cytoplasm of the cell, through plasmodesmata, which are cytoplasmic strands present in the cell wall, and the vacuolar pathways, that is through the vacuoles of the cells. So I will read this to you. Absorption and transport by root hairs and root cortex. The concentration of solutes in the cell sap of the root hair is greater than that of the surrounding water. The cells have a lower water potential and hence water is taken in from the soil. The water can follow three possible pathways to reach the root cortex and finally to the xylem vessels. One is apoplast pathway, second is symplast pathway, and the third is vacuolar pathway. The apoplast pathway, the water flows along and between the cell walls of adjacent cells and through the intercellular spaces. The apoplastic movement of water is exclusively through the cell wall without crossing any membrane. It does not involve the crossing of cell membrane. The symplast pathway, the water flows from one cell to another through the interconnected cytoplasmic strands called plasmodesmata. The water moves through the cell, that is their cytoplasm, and water has to enter the cells through the cell membrane. Hence the movement of water is slower. Water movement is again down a potential gradient from higher water potential to lower water potential. The third pathway is the vacuolar pathway. The water flows from one vacuole to the next through the plasma membrane and the tonoplast of the vacuole by the process of osmosis. Most of the water moves via the apoplast pathway, that is through the cell walls. It is considered to be the most important as it offers least resistance and results in the mass flow of water through the root cortex as a result of transpiration. As water is lost from the stomata, more water is pulled up which reaches the leaves. So a continuous pathway is maintained. And when water reaches the endodermis, which is the inner layer of the cortex, the Casparian strips of the endodermis will block the movement of water because Casparian strip is a waxy layer of suberin in the lateral cell wall. It is waterproof and it prevents the flow of water through it and directs water through the endodermal cytoplasm. What I told you over here, that here the flow of water will be blocked. So now from the cell wall it will come into the cytoplasm of the endodermal cells. The water moves through the symplast and reaches the cells of the xylem. Water in solutes pass through the cell membrane, which is called transmembrane pathway, and through the tonoplast, that is the vacuolar pathway. The endodermis, with its unique structure, controls the solutes and ions that reach the xylem. Now the next topic that we have to do is transport of water through the xylem, which we shall do on the next turn. This much is enough for today. Take care. Now we will do the next topic, water movement up a plant through xylem tissue. We will see the function of the xylem tissue, how it helps in upward movement of water or unidirectional movement of water from the root to the stem and to the leaves. This is also called ascent of water or ascent of water up through the xylem tissue. So we will see, do the next topic, transport of water upwards by xylem. You have studied various experiments in class 10 which proved that xylem helps in the transportation of water. And the simplest experiment that you had seen or studied in class 10 was that if you take a small herbaceous plant and dip the root of that plant in a beaker containing water and colored dye eosine is added, so the water is red in color. If you dip a plant, herbaceous plant, with the intact root and stem, branches, leaves in this colored water, and after some time you cut sections, you cut the section of the root, you cut a section of the stem, you cut a section of the leaf, you will observe that when you observe these sections under a microscope, you will observe that even the xylem of the root and the xylem of the stem and that of the leaf all take up the color of the dye that was put in this water, clearly indicating that transportation of water took place by the xylem tissue. That is why the xylem of the root, the stem and the leaf all had become light red in color, pink in color, because they got stained with the dye put in water. So there are many such experiments. I just reminded you of one because what you have studied in class 10, we are not doing that. We are moving on with the the processes that are involved in transport of substances in plants, and now we are talking about transport of water. So three main theories that have been proposed for transport of water. One is the root pressure theory. Second theory is capillarity theory. And the third theory is transpiration pull theory, which is also called the cohesion tension theory. All these theories prove the uptake of water by the xylem tissue. Now coming to the first theory, that is the root pressure theory. Root pressure is the pressure that builds up in the cells of the xylem. And how is this pressure formed? Now due to absorption of minerals against the concentration gradient by active absorption, that is which is dependent on energy. And when I say absorption of minerals against the concentration gradient, I mean minerals that are lesser outside the plant cells in soil if compared to what is inside the cell sap. So the cell sap is more concentrated, that means has less water and more solutes. Yet more solutes, more minerals move along with water into the cell against the concentration gradient, means from low concentration to high concentration. This is active transport with the involvement of energy. So when the minerals become more inside the cell, what happens? A pressure builds up. Water potential falls because water potential of pure water is taken to be 0. And when it is moving, when more minerals are there inside the cell and less water is there, means the water potential is becoming low. There is more water potential outside, so more water will be taken in. Water moves from higher water potential to lower water potential, so water will be absorbed by the root and will reach the xylem tissue. So a pressure will build up in the xylem tissue, and this pressure is called root pressure. So root pressure is created, and because of this pressure, root pressure, xylem carries water higher up in the plant through the stem to the leaves. And two processes like bleeding and guttation prove the existence of root pressure. Now, what is bleeding? Root pressure can be proved by two processes. One is bleeding and the second is guttation. You have studied about these. Bleeding means when any part of the plant is cut or is wounded, we see sap oozing out of this cut portion of the plant. Because the vascular tissue, by cutting the plant, especially when you are pruning the plants, or somebody breaks a branch, damage or wound is caused to the plant, there is oozing of cell sap. This oozing is because of the root pressure that has been built up in the xylem tissue. So bleeding is one process which proves the existence of root pressure. Second process is guttation. Now in plants, herbaceous plants, in which the rate of transpiration is low and rate of absorption is high, and because of root pressure, at late night hours or in early mornings, it is observed that water comes out in the form of droplets. That is actually the cell sap. Water with dissolved substances comes out from the ends of veins. You know, in leaves, suppose this is a leaf of a nasturtium plant. The tip of the veins have got special pores, and these pores are called hydathoids. So hydathoids are present at the tips of these veins. These are small openings, and in herbaceous plants where the rate of transpiration is low, late night and early morning, droplets of water are seen coming out, oozing out from these hydathoids, these pores. This is guttation. So we define guttation as the removal of water in the form of tiny droplets. In contrast to transpiration, transpiration is also removal of water, but it is removal of water in the form of water vapor. Here It is removal of water in the form of water droplets, and the cause of this removal of water droplets is nothing else but the building up of root pressure, and it is oozing out from the ends of the veins. Veins are nothing but vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. So the root pressure that has been built up in the xylem leads to guttation. Then the next theory for uptake of water is capillarity theory. So in plants only to I will say only to a small degree, it is observed that there is a small rise of water in the xylem tissues, which is basically because of the adhesion of the water molecules with the walls of the xylem tissue. Like when we dip a straw in water, without even sucking from the straw, we see that the water level rises in the straw. That is because the bore is very fine. Bore of the straw, or the diameter of the straw, is very fine. Water molecules stick to the wall of the straw, and water rises up in the straw. So this is capillary movement of water. So the capillarity theory in case of xylem is the same as that adhesion of water molecules to the walls of the xylem results in a slight rise in water. And once this is established, then because of cohesion of water molecules, a continuous column is prepared, which will, so combination of this and this. Now, as I have been telling you, I told you earlier also that the roots absorb water, and finally water reaches from the roots to the central tissue, the xylem. This xylem is in continuation with the xylem of the stem, and with the xylem of the branch, and the xylem of the leaf. So when water has moved in due to root pressure, due to capillarity, now adhesion of water molecules to the walls of xylem vessel, and cohesion of water molecules. That is, water molecules have a force called cohesive force. Several water molecules join and they form a column. And when transpiration occurs, that is, water is lost, a suction force is created. Due to loss of water by transpiration, a suction force is created, and a continuous column is maintained. So more water will be absorbed, more water will rise up from the xylem of the root to the xylem of the stem, finally into the leaves, from which it will be given out. So this pull is called transpirational pull theory, or we say cohesion tension theory, because adhesion of water molecules with the walls of the xylem and cohesion of water molecules among themselves, a continuous column is maintained which will take water upwards through the xylem. So these are the three theories that have been proposed for the uptake of water through the xylem. Now I will just read it out for you so that it becomes even more clear to you. The three important theories that describe the ascent of water are the root pressure theory, the capillarity theory, the cohesion tension or the transpirational pull theory. Root pressure theory says that the cells accumulate minerals by active absorption against the concentration gradient. This leads to the lowering of water potential, and it increases the pressure inside the xylem. This positive pressure is called root pressure, and the pushing up of xylem sap is due to the root pressure. Bleeding is one phenomena which is seen in certain plants that are cut or wounded, and the plant's sap flows from the cut end with a considerable force. This is called bleeding. The xylem sap which exudes out under root pressure from the cut end of the sap is because of root pressure, and the root pressure ranges from 3 to 5 atmosphere. Then a second phenomena called guttation also proves the existence of root pressure. The plants in which transpiration is low and the root pressure is high, the liquid water oozes out from the vein endings, and this is called guttation. Guttation is seen occurring frequently at night and early mornings in the herbaceous plants that grow under high soil moisture and high atmospheric humidity. It occurs through specialized pores, and these pores are called hydatodes, which are present near the vein endings. And the phenomena of guttation is seen in some grasses, in tomato, in nasturtium, and these are common examples of plants showing phenomena of guttation. Second theory is the capillarity theory, and it is said that in plants a small rise in the water column can occur by capillarity. According to this theory, water is first taken in due to the force of adhesion between the water molecules and the walls of the xylem vessels, and then as the water moves upwards, the cohesive forces amongst the water molecules help it to rise as a column. And the third theory is transpirational pull theory, also called cohesion tension theory. The cohesion tension theory is based on the adhesion between the water molecules and the transpirational pull created by the leaves. According to this theory, the driving force for the movement of water is a water potential gradient that is generated by transpiration. So we call it as the transpirational pull theory. A kind of water potential gradient exists from the leaf to the root, and this creates a transpirational pull, what I had explained you here. The water molecules have a strong force of cohesion, that is, they have a tendency to stick to one another and they stick together. This allows the formation of a continuous water column from the top of the tree down to the tip of the root. A continuous flow, a continuous column is created from the top of the tree, from the tip of the tree to the tip of the root. There is also a force of adhesion between the walls of the xylem vessels and the water molecules. The lignocellulose walls have a strong affinity for water molecules. So, xylem vessels attract water molecules by adhesion. Water molecules attract each other by cohesion, and both the forces then form a thin, unbroken column of water in the capillaries of the xylem vessels. The transpirational pull lifts the water column up by creating a tension. This phenomenon provides a possible explanation of how water is lifted to the tallest trees that occur on earth, and till now this is the most widely accepted theory which has been proposed for the rise of water upwards by the xylem tissue. Now on the next turn we are going to start with transpiration. Keep studying, stay safe, stay healthy and be relaxed. Okay.